Hi, welcome to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Thanks for joining the conversation. Coach Michael Boyle is known internationally for his pioneering work in the field of strength and conditioning, and he is regarded as one of the top experts in the area for sports performance training. He's made his mark on the industry over the past 30 years with an impressive following of professional athletes from the U.S. women's Olympic teams in soccer and ice hockey to the Boston Bruins, Boston Breakers, New England Revolution, and the Boston Red Sox. Oscar and I had the honor of training with Coach Boyle at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning for a week and learned so much from him and his incredible coaching staff. In this episode, we cover everything from music appreciation to podcasts and books. We also discuss his legacy and the importance of putting systems in place. My favor, as always, is to please continue to share this podcast with others and rate it on your platform of choice. If you would like to help keep this podcast going and support the work I do, you can become a patron of the show by visiting my website or patreon.com/SifuMimiChan. Thank you so much for the support. I appreciate it. For comments or suggestions, reach out on social media at SifuMimiChan. Now, on with the show. Hello, the great Michael Boyle. So great to have you on the podcast again.
I said third time's a charm, so it's nice to be back for my third visit.
Yes, and hopefully it won't be your last visit. So
hopefully not.
Well, it's always an honor to talk to you. And I looked up and I was really shocked to see it's been 3 years since we've actually spoken, which was, to me, seems so long because you're always so nice to always email me back, though. So we have communicated by the internet, but we haven't spoken in 3 years. I couldn't believe it.
That surprised me, actually, but I think that's sort of the power of the internet, is that you don't realize that stuff because you are regularly communicating with somebody, even though you maybe are not, actually speaking.
I know, it's crazy. But I'm super excited to talk to you today. Obviously, I'm sporting my MBSC shirt, so I was really, really excited to talk to you. But I think also the last 2 years have been kind of suspended in time for everyone. Like it was just like that 2 years. So really, it's like 1 year we haven't spoken. But one of the things I remembered from our conversation was that you're really great at house renovations, and I know a lot of people who were at home ended up doing so much during the pandemic. I was curious what you accomplished, because I'm sure there was some construction going on.
There absolutely was. We finished finishing the basement. We had started finishing our basement. We were having somebody do it for us. He was in his 70s. He's kind of a friend who's done a lot of construction work for us, and his wife wouldn't let him come anymore. She said, it's, they have kids, you're a high risk person, you can't come. And so suddenly we had the basement kind of studded out, and it was like, okay, what are we going to do? And after a couple of days of sitting around, I thought, okay, Home Depot's still open. It's essential. Let's go to Home Depot and get some sheetrock and start hanging the sheetrock. And we just kind of took it a step at a time, where we kept going and saying, okay, let's hang sheetrock. All right, the sheetrock was done. All right, we'll tape the sheetrock. We'll tape the sheetrock. All right, we'll paint. And then, okay, well, let's try. We'll throw the trim up, see what happens. And then we had to put ceilings in. Okay, we'll put the ceilings in. Let's see what happens. And it was great. I was very much at ease. I feel like I can retire, which is a really good thing, because we're in the process of trying to figure out what to do with the business anyway. And so it made me comfortable. I mean, people always said, oh, you wouldn't be able to retire. What would you do? And the pandemic made me realize I'd be very comfortable doing nothing. I'd be really comfortable just sleeping a little bit later, putzing around the house a little bit more in the morning before I get up, going for a walk, doing some work in the yard, doing some construction projects. I really am not, I'm not as motivated as I was. And I think that's part of getting old. I'm 62, and I don't get as fired up to go to the gym as I once did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, that was on my list of questions for you, because you and I also have shared our love for music. And my mom volunteers at our local theater to like usher and things like that. She likes to keep busy, and especially because she likes to see the shows for free. And so Frankie Valli was there performing, and you and I have talked about that. And he's 87. And she goes, I
Is
can't
he
believe
really
it. Yeah,
87?
she goes, I can't believe it. He was singing just like before, but he didn't do too much dancing or moving.
Yeah, and he doesn't do. I've seen him. I saw him not that recently, but he also wasn't doing the falsetto parts. He had another guy that they kind of drag around with them who
Yeah.
has got a really, a Frankie Valley age, circa 20, 25 years old, who does a lot of the high stuff. But yeah, that I saw that he was around recently and I almost went. I was like, oh, maybe I'll go one last time because
Yeah.
I start to feel like with some of these artists that, wow, we're going to miss it. During the pandemic, actually, we were supposed to see Three Dog Night and it got canceled 3 different times. And then the final, they came back again and they scheduled it. And it, like within a couple of days of them scheduling it, the town they were in issued a mask mandate for the theater. And I was like, I am not going to a concert and sitting in a freaking mask, because I'm so done with masks and all that crap. And so I didn't go. My business partner, Bobby, went and he kept sending me videos and I was so mad. So they're coming back this summer. They're going to play this summer again.
All
And I'm
right.
going to
So
get
you have
tickets to
another
a bunch of
round.
them. But one of my friends said that you need to see Three Dog Night soon before their Two Dog Night because they're also, I know they're in their, I think they're in their late 70s and they're
Yeah.
still really, really good in their late 70s. But
I
we've
always
seen
find it
some of these
amazing.
shows. We saw, and you'd probably know just because because of your mom, but we saw Gary Puckett.
Oh,
You
I've
see Gary
seen Gary
Puckett,
Puckett
and he
like
was same way.
a
He's
while
got
ago.
like swagger at almost 80 years old. He comes out, he's
Wow.
got like long hair, and he's got sort of a Western inspired kind of trench coat that he's wearing. And I'm like, this guy is like, he's really cool for, we're looking up his birthday. I think he was born like in 1942 or something. So
Wow.
I think we calculated at that time that he was 17 years older than me,
Okay.
which would have made him like 77 at that time.
Right. Oh my gosh, that is so wild. I've actually seen him back in the, I would say 80s or something. So I was quite young, but I remember, young girl and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well,
So
you're very well schooled in music. I love
uh,
that.
I love it. Oh, it's just funny
Not
because
every young girl can tell you a Gary Puckett song.
there you go. There
So
you go. Well, I remember very, like you said, the swagger. So my thought is, because I'm seeing like all these people who are still doing, and I think the voice is definitively just like a muscle, right? So whoever stops, then they kind of start to lose it. But of course, as you age, it gets harder. But I find it remarkable that they're still performing in their 70s and 80s. And it made me think about, well, I'm wondering, is Michael Boyle going to be going into the gym and saying his famous quotes in his 80s, or what your plan was? But now I foresee you in the trench coat, like swaggering in. I think this is a good plan, actually. Like cameo appearances.
yeah, and I think there will be. I'd still, like I said, I like to go. What I don't like the responsibility. I don't like the worry about, and worry is a hard thing to turn off. I think you need to transfer worry to somebody else. And when there's
Yes.
somebody else we're kind of in the process of getting some of the younger guys that are working for us and talking to them about the process of buying us out, because I need them. I've always been big on having, partnerships anyway. So we're partners in CFSC with Kevin Carr and with Brendan. And I want to have some of these young guys be partners with us in the gym, be owner operators, so that worry now transfers to them. And the
Right.
worry is no longer mine. The worry is, there's a 30-year-old guy, it's his worry about, on days when it snows, did the walks get shoveled? Is
Right.
there ice melt out there? Is there toilet paper in the bathrooms? There's all these things that you kind of can't turn off in your head, and I need to turn them off.
I completely understand. And I certainly haven't had the earned the right, like you and perhaps my father, and like the experience in having to have done that for so long. But I feel like I've been at it as well. And I know what you mean, because you'll wake up and you'll say, oh gosh, did we set this or so and so at the school? Or, is the pest control coming? And this needs to get renewed. And there's just things that you don't think about when you're just the person that gets to show up to teach the class. that's actually such a joy. So I always tell my instructors, like, you all get to just show up and teach, and that's the joyous part, even though it can be tedious. Because yes, the business owner part, I agree with you, turning that off is really difficult, and I think we probably share some similarities in personality with that as well. But
Yeah, as I said, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to having less responsibility, and as it is, I mean, I kind of come and go as I please anyway, and everybody's really great about that at work, and the people that work with us do an amazing job. But yeah, I just would like for it to kind of be, hey, here, this is your situation now to concern yourself with.
wow, that's exciting for you, actually. You know, Oscar and I always talk about the week that we spent up there, and it's just, I can't believe it's been so long. We need to come back, but it's just very fond memories because, you know, as you know, I have a kung fu system, and in our system, it's very familial, right? Like we all have like family names for one another. Most of the people there, like, you know, you get a certain core that stays for a long time, like your Kevin Carrs and your Brendans, and like the people that you kind of end up becoming like family with. And, you know, so that culture, I think, is really interesting because there's some similarities, while at the same time, your intern program is like, you know, world renowned. Like there's always new people coming in and people going out, and there's just kind of that ebb and flow. And do you feel like, of course, you know, Kevin has been instrumental and been with you a long time, but do you feel like it's hard to retain the quote unquote older guys, like the more senior ones that have been there a while? Because is there like it seems like there's a high turnover in that industry.
Yeah, I think it is hard, and I think that's part of the process too, with these guys actually being able to buy into the business. It's another way to retain some of your best people, because you're saying to your best people that I believe in you, and I believe that you're, it's you know, I believe the children are our future, the song, you know, it's kind of like, but you believe like, okay, these guys are the future of this business,
Yeah.
and they're the right people to carry it forward. Because even, and I don't, as I said, I don't think these businesses are super saleable anyway, but even if you were to sell it to someone who was interested in buying it as an operating business with the idea that they could make money, there's that kind of ethos that you lose when you do it. And I would personally, I'd rather get less money for the business and know that it will continue to operate in the spirit that it was founded,
Mhm.
than make a lot of money selling it. And I think that's probably the difference between somebody like me and someone who starts some kind of publicly traded company and says, hey, I want to build this up and then sell it to somebody.
Mhm.
And I don't think they really care what happens after they sell it. I think they just realize, I want to build something up, build the asset value up, get lots of customers, sell it to somebody else, and then I'll go start over again and do that again. I think ours are much more kind of personal and mission oriented.
Mhm.
And as a result, you would be more, or I would be more hurt if things didn't go the way I wanted them to go.
Yeah, if suddenly you saw everyone doing all of your least on those that on that
Right.
Mike Boyle list of
Yeah. I mean,
I know
I
what you
couldn't
mean.
do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be very distraught.
You'd come back in your trench coat and reclaim. But I feel the same way, like, you know, for especially with traditional kung fu, it's a very specific thing, and there's like so much to it that, you know, while we are in a modern world and things do need to evolve, we do need to use technology and science and all these things, but like there are certain essence of things, like the character of it, I think is kind of maybe a great way to describe that. I think that like one of the things I noticed as well, because we were very fortunate, we were able to continue training fairly much through the pandemic because we don't have snow here, and so we can work outdoors, and you know there's a lot going on. I was curious what your thoughts were, because I know personally you know yourself so well, but like, did you see gym goers or people in general more motivated now that, you know, the pandemic's kind of a bit behind us, and or do you think they go back to their routine pretty quickly of like taking things for granted? And, you know, like, for example, are they like, oh, I'm so excited to be back in the presence of Mike Boyle and to get to be schooled by him? Or do you feel people
Well,
just fall back?
I think people honestly just fall back.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay. I think that's what we wanted them to do. I think we wanted it to get back to normal as fast as we could. And our customers were great, our clients, in terms of, we had a lot of clients, and I don't know exactly what the number was, but there was a fairly substantial percentage of our clients who just kept paying their membership dues and told us that we're fine paying. We want you to be here when we get back. And that was a really nice feeling for us to know that, okay, there are people out there who care enough about what we're doing that they want to support it, even when the service is not being provided for them. So that was really good. And there were people that came back immediately. As soon as the day they could come back, they were back. And there were other people who were a little hesitant. And a year later, we still get people who are showing up just now thinking, okay, I think I'm ready to be in an indoor space. So I think there was a little bit of a spectrum of people, but in general, people just, I think they wanted to get back to normal. Most of our people are very social animals, which is why they're with us.
Yeah.
Everybody, I mean, you could buy one of our workouts on Train Heroic and do it, but people don't. You could buy the workout on Train Heroic and go to Planet Fitness for $15 a month and everything would be great. But they don't do that. They like the coaching, but I think as much as the coaching, I think they like the interaction. I think they like being around other people, being around like-minded people every day. So it's very much back to normal.
That's great. That's great to hear. And I love that, I've been very fortunate to speak with so many amazing people through this podcast, actually, because like you said, like, oh yeah, we connect through the internet, we email, but it's just less and less of the age, I guess, of time that we're in, where you pick up the phone and you're just like having hour-long conversations with people. Not that you and I would be like chatting on the phone, but I love that I've been able to talk with so many people in the industry, and one of which is Coach Dan John. And I've actually had him on the show over like 10 times, I think, because we are exploring the sword and the stone together. And we've been doing this like amazing philosophy, like dissection, and going like kind of deep into it. And it's been really, really rewarding. And I said, oh, I'll be speaking to your pal, Mike Boyle, soon. And of course, you know what he told me to tell you.
He loves me. That's what he probably told me.
Absolutely. He says, tell him I love him.
I love him like that. He is, honestly, he's one of the nicest human beings that there is out there. He is just, I love just being around him, being in his presence is wonderful. I love when I get to go to a seminar, if it's an hour or if it's 2 hours or 4 hours. I love when we have him out here. He's been out twice to speak to our staff and to speak at our seminars. And he's a really good guy. And it's funny because people think, because we don't necessarily agree on everything about training. And I was having that conversation with another friend of mine today, but people assume that means that we don't like each other. And it's sort of the furthest thing from the truth, in terms of, he still likes squatting. I don't. He likes whatever, kettlebell snatches. I don't, whatever it is. But that has nothing to do with our ability to have great conversations. And like you said, you're talking about sword and stone. We're not talking about training. 90% of the time when we're around, we don't talk about training. He and I more now, we talk about family and kids and life much more than we would talk about, oh, what do you think about, why don't you like back squats? I like back squats. You know what I mean? Like, we don't ever have that conversation.
Right.
Neither one of us has any interest in it, really. And so it's just nice when I get to see him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just really cool because, like I said, I've been able to talk to so many amazing people, and then I start drawing lines and how connected and how everyone knows one another. And I was curious because being in what you do for such a long time, not just through fitness but other areas of life, like you end up meeting people. How long have you known Dan John, for example?
Oh, let me think. I don't know, 10 years, 12 years, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Okay.
It was because, again, Dan was a lot like me in terms of, he was sort of off toiling in obscurity. He was teaching at a boys' Catholic school in Utah, coaching football, coaching track. And it wasn't until he started writing that I became aware of him. And I think it probably was T Nation, early 2000s. I started reading Dan John articles. And I remember thinking, I like this Dan John guy. He's an interesting, because he always had, there was always a very intellectual theme to his writing.
Yeah, very
He wrote,
scholarly.
yes, very scholarly. And then you start to realize, okay, he's got a, you know, sort of a religious scholar's background. He was a Fulbright scholar. He's a really smart guy. And we've kind of evolved through the field together in very similar ways over a pretty similar period of time. We're similar in age. And initially it was just me reading his stuff. And then somehow I reached out to him about something to try to connect. And, you know, there was a friendship, and then it was, okay, let's get him out here. You know, we'd be a really good speaker for our winter seminar. So that might've been, I might guess that it was 2009, 2010, maybe the first time he came out. And I'd have to go back and think. I know the house we were living in, so that would be a way for me to somewhat calculate where he was. But the best part about the whole seminar, well, there were two best parts of the whole seminar. One, he shows up the first day. So he comes out on Thursday night with the idea that, you know, I'm going to come in Friday and I just want to kind of hang around and train. And he says something, can I bring my friend Taylor with me? I'm like, you can bring anybody you want. I don't care who you bring with you. And he shows up with this kind of young guy in tow who's probably in his 20s. And then as we continue to talk about it, I realized he met him at the hotel bar on Thursday night. Like, the kid's coming to the seminar. So like, they're not, at that time, they're not really friends at all, in terms of they've literally just met. But Taylor gets to come with Dan, spends the day on Friday with us. I think we went to a BU game on Friday night, a hockey game. He goes to the hockey game with us.
Oh my God.
He comes to the seminar with us, or, you know, goes to the seminar and hangs around and meets everybody at the seminar. And then we have a party on Saturday night at my house, which he also comes to with Dan after the seminar. And it's Super Bowl Sunday.
Wow.
The next day. And we proceed, Dan comes over to watch the Super Bowl, and he brings Taylor with him again. We realize now Taylor, this guy, his name was Taylor Lewis. Taylor changed his flight, realizing that he was, you know, like, okay, I'm having the opportunity of a lifetime here, right?
Yes,
now.
Yeah,
You know,
pretty
I'm
much.
hanging out at Mike Boyle's house with Dan John, and I just got invited to their Super Bowl party. So he moves his flight from Sunday to Monday.
Oh
so
my
he
God.
go to the Super Bowl party. But that to me is like classic Dan.
Yeah.
In terms of including some kid in his 20s who he met having a beer at the bar the night before, and then treating him like he's his best friend, to the point where when I'm having the conversation, you know, how do you know Taylor? He's like, oh, I met him last night. He was at the hotel. And now he's your best friend and coming everywhere with us and spending, you know, the weekend.
Wow.
And Dan literally ended up on the floor. My Mark was young enough, so he's 17. I mean, it was young enough that there was drawing stuff around, crayons, markers and things, and a big like easel pad. And I remember he was on the floor, laying on the floor of my house with Brendan Rierick and some other kids, and with the drawing pad out, like drawing, like they were drawing the world of strength and conditioning, I don't know, on the floor at, you know, 11 o'clock at night, with a bunch of 20-year-olds laying on the rug. But as all of that, I would look at and say, like, classic Dan John, totally, completely without pretense.
Yeah.
Just
Wow.
a regular guy who just, I'm just here, you know, here to do seminar, and hopefully we can hang out and we'll drink a few beers and talk and meet some nice people. And all of the above happened. And now even like Brendan and Kevin and all those guys, they're really good friends with Dan. They go to seminars, they hang around with Dan.
Right.
But these were all friendships that were made very accidentally. They were not at all any intended part of what we were doing.
Yeah. I love that about Dan. Thank you for sharing that story. That's fantastic. And it does give everyone kind of a window into who he is, and knowing him now, I can completely see that. I would say that if I feel like, and I could be wrong, I'd like you to let me know, like, are you that easy to form friendships with someone in the way that you just described Dan as, or do you kind of like take a little
I'd
longer?
be that easy. I think Dan's a little more outgoing than I am. I think I might be a little more reticent, a little more, maybe less likely to talk to somebody that I didn't know and really strike up that conversation. So,
I mean, that's not me for sure.
Yeah. I would like to think I have some of that in me, but I know that Dan has way more of it. Dan has that in by the poundful. So.
Oh my gosh, that's so much fun. And of course I follow you on social, and it's like one of the, you haven't done like a series of rants like I had seen you doing a little further back, but I always enjoy your opinions and your opinions based on
I
facts though.
think that stuff runs in streaks in terms of sometimes somebody will get you aggravated. Maybe I'm not having as many rants because I'm doing better at blocking people on Twitter. So I don't have as many idiots in my feed who get me ranting and raving, which is kind of a good thing.
It
I
is.
think I'm getting, I was saying to somebody, I'm getting better at Twitter because I've got some great high school coaches that I follow on Twitter and that I interact with pretty well and, or pretty regularly, I guess. And one of the things that was really interesting is that, one of them introduced me to Twitter analytics, which I didn't even know they existed because he tweeted, I broke 1,000,000 impressions. I was like, I think that's good. I said, kind of, what's 1,000,000 impressions? And so he sends me something, okay, go to Twitter, go down to the 3 dots, click 3 dots. When it says analytics, click that, and then you'll see. And so I've started to get a better handle on what works. I've started to look at, okay, what are people interested in? I hate to say what gets likes because that sounds like you're just looking for likes. That's not the goal, but getting a better sense of what people are looking for and what people are interested in. And sometimes then I'll try to move in that direction. Other times I don't care. If something kind of comes into my head that I think is tweetable, I'll just tweet it anyway. But I have realized that people are really looking for more information about programming. I did a program design series of tweets. I think I called it Program Design 101. And I think I ended up doing about 15 of them over the course of 15 days. And that month I hit almost 4 million impressions because some of these were getting massive amounts of views and likes. And so it's Twitter's a really interesting place. I'm very glad Elon Musk bought it, to be honest. I think the fact that we're going to get more free speech on Twitter is great. And the fact that we can get it out of the hands of people who are trying to restrict it is really good. Although I don't think it'll matter much in the strength and conditioning world. I think overall it will hopefully make it a better platform because it's my favorite. I have way more Instagram followers.
Yeah.
I enjoy Twitter much more. I think Twitter is much more
interesting,
particularly from a strength and conditioning / personal training. It's way more interactive. Whereas Instagram is more like someone looks at your stuff and it's like, you're awesome. They click like or whatever. But on Twitter, you get more because all it really is small
back and forth.
Yeah. So whereas in Instagram, you can like, sometimes I forget to even look at the comments. So I just post a picture or post a video, and then sometimes don't know that anybody reacted at all. I had one the other day. I posted my advances in functional training finally made it to Spanish. We were trying for a while to find
I saw that
a Spanish publisher, but it had 254 comments, and that's the most comments I've ever had. But it was just Spanish speaking people sharing it with other Spanish speaking people. So I went through all the comments to look and think. I couldn't understand what any of them said anyway, because they were all in Spanish. And most of them were just tagging somebody else.
Right, to share it.
Okay. That's good. Hopefully I sold some books.
I think so. You probably did for sure. But that's so interesting. And you probably could teach me about it, honestly, because I am not very good at either. But it is kind of funny because I look at Twitter maybe once a week at the most, and it's very rare. And it's funny because you actually did interact with me not too long ago because I was like, oh, Mike Boyle is the one that encouraged me to read 100 books a year. And you're like, I think it was 10.
Yes. I was like, wow.
I'm like, overachiever.
You're giving me super credit. 100 books a year. My God, that's like one every 3 days.
Well, when you do audio though, it could go quicker. So I don't know if it still counts in your world of like,
I think, one of my great regrets is that I don't work at BU anymore and I don't get stuck in traffic because I was way better with audiobooks.
Yeah.
When I knew, okay, I've got a day, it's going to take me an hour to get there. It's going to take me 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I could just throw an audiobook on. I would say I bet I averaged 10 more books a year when I had the long commute.
Right. Yeah, because you just
And lately
you
I've
have
been
the
more
attention.
podcasting books. I haven't been reading. It's funny that goes in cycles too. I have a lot of books that I've got sitting around that I need to read that I haven't, but I found myself more drawn to podcasts because I can kind of drip those in. Like I can get an hour podcast in, like back and forth to work twice now is an hour, and I can listen to a podcast during that time.
What are your go-to podcasts?
I've actually, there's, I always listen to our Strength Coach podcast one because I like to listen to my own interviews to see how I see how I sound, because I think you can always work on your ability to speak. And I find that when I'm not comfortable, I use a lot of filler words. There'll be a lot of, and hmms,
Me too.
and so I like to listen to those. So I always will listen to that. And Anthony does a good job with interviewing the whatever guests he has on there. So I will tend to go through that one. I've been enjoying the Huberman podcast lately, which I think is interesting, but it has to be the right subject. He's really smart, but some things I'm not interested in at all. And other things I find, he did a great one with a guy named Andy Galpin that ended up, it was 3 hours.
Wow.
But it was 3 hours on kind of the science of strength and conditioning. And it was actually very good. So I think his is interesting. There's another one called Leave Your Mark, which I really like, Scott Livingston. And Scott actually interviews a lot of people that you or I might know in the fitness or coaching world. But Scott has a very natural way of getting people to talk and tell stories that they haven't told anybody else. So I've listened to ones. I listened to Mark Verstegen. I listened to my friend Todd Wright. I listen to these guys, and I'm thinking, wow. Every time I hear one of Scott's, I find something out about somebody that I didn't know.
Nice.
So he does a good job. There's another one called Student Athlete Preparation Podcast, where the guy interviews, actually, it turns out it's a lot of the people that I know, high school guys from Twitter. He's a high school strength coach, and he does a really good job. So that, I think the high school stuff is really good for me, because that's really my market right now. We're high school, middle school strength coaches. So I like that one. Trying to think of the others that
What's nice about podcasts is, like you said, with a book, it's it's usually several hours. And with podcasts, you can skip the ones you don't like. There's no continuity issues, and you can just that's why you probably digest them so quickly too.
Yeah, exactly. And what I do, I'm looking through, because what I tend to do is I find the topics that I like. So from Twitter, there's a bunch of people that have podcasts, and I'll bookmark. I won't listen to every podcast by a certain person. I'll just listen to certain guests, whether they're people that are that have a business that I'm interested in, or whether so there's a kid that does one called the Jacked Athlete Podcast. I call it. It's the worst named podcast in the world. This kid Jake Tura, and he's a really good interviewer. He's done some incredibly good interviews, because he's kind of become famous for working with people with patella tendon problems, but he's gone so deep. He's gotten the best researchers and the best rehab people in the world of patella tendon and had them on his show. So he's this kind of selectively really interesting. A guy named Eric Corum does one called The Blueprint, which is interesting. There's a bunch. I'm just looking at him here as I kind of scroll through my feed.
Yeah, you are definitely digesting a lot of podcasts.
I am.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I always find that interesting, because you're kind of one of those people that we almost on a weekly basis, if not daily. I don't actually coach in the gym or anything like that. I mostly only do the Kung Fu stuff, but I'll frequent over and see what Oscar's doing. And, with his clients, he's just got very, very small group, and does just 3 people at a time or so. But, pretty much you probably come up in terms of being quoted at least, once a week, if not once a day, in that classroom. So, and just even all the work that, the foundation that you laid, it's just, it's kind of there. And that's kind of the format he uses, the same programming. And that's probably why that programming got the 4 million impressions, because you know what you're doing.
Thank you. It's good to be still relevant anyway.
Oh my gosh, beyond still relevant. And it's funny because we were talking about books, and one that I'm pretty sure it was you that recommended was Think Again by Adam Grant. And Oscar and I are always talking and dissecting that one, and we recommend it to like everyone. And um, it's funny because I think there's something really great that in the especially in teaching, right? When you've been quote unquote around a long time. I know you said it's been 40 years, and it's not that you're old, it's you're experienced. And I agree with that. But you've always been great about the new science or a new way of looking at something and smarter methods to movement. And that you are not, I'm stuck in this way because this is the way we've always done it. And I feel like there's pretty much those two camps. There's that, and some people are like, no, this is the way we've always done it.
Yeah,
And
I think strength and conditioning is very much this is the way we've always done it. And or even worse, this is the way that I've always done it, not even we.
right.
But there's very much a what I would call a Bud Light and chocolate chip ice cream approach in terms of that's what I like, so that's what everybody should like. And I just don't think that's good for anybody. It's not good for you as a coach. It's not good for your clients. And so, I loved Think Again. That was one of those, and that was a podcast somebody recommended. Someone said you'd really like this podcast,
Mhm.
and I think it was Adam Grant on somebody else's podcast. But I listened to him, and I immediately went out and bought the book. And then sometimes lately, I find myself I read a book, and I might get 50, 60 pages into it and think, I'm not loving this. And I don't force myself to finish them anymore. I used to think, okay, I have to finish
Uh-huh.
just because, again, that's kind of how you're wired. Like, all right, I started, I need to finish it.
Right.
Now I can very easily just toss it aside and be like, nah, nothing in there for me that I really thought was great. So, and sometimes I go back. Sometimes people will say, oh, you missed, you should have
Mhm.
finished that book. And then I will go back. But lately more now I don't. But Think Again was like, boom, I just ripped through Think Again because, and again, it is repetitive to some degree because he just keeps very similar, I think, to David Epstein. He just provides you example after example of why this matters. And it's pretty powerful because I say to people all the time, this is exactly what you should be doing. You know about something, now you should think again. Think about it again. Take another look at it, and maybe look at it from a slightly different viewpoint, or maybe look at it. I always think look at it from a slightly different point in time, because where you're at in your career will greatly determine kind of what the meaning is in something to you. And then 10 years later, you look at it and think, I don't see that quite the same way anymore, which is really good in some cases.
Yeah. And so the question I guess I have kind of following up through that is like, is there a nuance to that though, where if some people maybe haven't, I don't want to say earn the right, but maybe you kind of have to master the box before you think of outside of it? Or do you feel like it's always good to continuously question? I mean, I guess I think about those people on Twitter who are always like saying stuff to you
Well,
and like, well, I already know all of this. And so
yeah,
I think we should do this way. Or like an intern comes in and you say, hey, here's how I want you to do the warm-ups. Do it like this. And then on their first day, they're like, well, I think I should do it like this because this actually happened to us in our gym. And we're like, can you just do what we told you to do for now? And because they're new, right? And you want them to learn the method and safety and all the things that you always preach. So what are your thoughts on that, I guess?
I think you're absolutely right. I think, again, I wrote an article called "There's a Reason There Is a Box,"
Mm-hmm.
and so I always think, and it was basically the idea that you need to be the master of the box before you think outside the box. And I think what happens a lot of times is we get people who they don't even know what's in the box. Like they haven't, never mind master of the box, they haven't looked in the box, but they want you to be, I'm an outside the box kind of guy. And I'm like, I don't want any outside the box kind of guys until I understand that you're like, oh, I've been in the box. I got the box down. I know exactly what we're going to do. And that's very much our method at MBSC in terms of we'll have a meeting. So we're close to a month away from our summer intern meeting, 5 weeks probably
Okay.
till we have our summer intern meeting. And in
Okay.
that meeting, I will always say to them, don't think. Thinking is where you get in trouble. When you come to me and say, I thought, you will be trying to explain a mistake that you made. That will be the conversations wherever anybody says to me, well, I always say to them, I thought is like an apology because somebody got hurt or something went wrong or something broke, something didn't go the way that it was supposed to go. And the reason that happened was because you thought. And that's really insulting. I think people could look at and say, that's terrible. It's insulting. It's demeaning. And I try to approach that in that meeting and say to them, I understand all of that. I also understand that we have a system that has to work, and you adapting the system or you attempting to think about how to do it a different way is going to knock things off the rails. And so it's tough. That's a hard lesson for these kids to learn kind of right out of the gate is, I'm going to Mike Boyle's to learn and he's telling me not to think. That doesn't sound right. Yet it is right because you're going to learn. It's not like I'm handing you the system and saying, hey, here's the system. I want you to analyze it and tell me how you think you could improve it. That's not part of the conversation. What I'm saying is, here's the system. I'd like you to learn how to implement it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very different process, but some people could come away and have come away from that thinking, well, that's an insult. I'm smart. I should be able to think. No one should be telling me not to think. And I'm like, hey, sorry, this is the annual conversation. But what I also say is there'll come a time when I look at like Kevin or, and Steve Bigelow and Vinny and those guys, I want them to think. I want them to question. We talk in staff meetings all the time. I want you to question what we're doing. But here is the venue for questioning what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to bring it up in a staff meeting so that we can discuss it as a group. So if for no other reason, I can explain to you why I feel the way I do. This is why I feel the way I do. This is why we're doing it this way. And then if you want to offer a suggestion as to, hey, I think we could do it like this, I'm perfectly open to that. It doesn't mean we're going to do it differently. It just means I am now open to your suggestion. So I am now willing to listen to your viewpoint on this. And I might at the end say, that's great. I really appreciate you thinking that way, but we're going to do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
And that happens a lot. But
yeah,
at different times, Dan McGinley and Steve, they write the programs now a lot because they know what we want to get done. They understand what we want to get accomplished. And they're doing a lot of the writing because they are good thinkers and they do understand the system, but you need to really understand the system.
Yeah. I definitely relate to that. And like I said, I always kind of analogize what you're doing in my martial arts world and what I do at my school. And I think just because I've been in it for so long, I've often found myself, constantly in a position of leadership with people my age or much older than I am. And there's always this, there's just a different, it's an interesting dynamic. I think there's a lot to be said for just kind of learning how to wield that world of what you're saying of like, okay, here's the time I want you to think, here's the time I want you to listen. And I feel like it just depends on who's giving the messaging, right? I feel like maybe what I've learned kind of in my 20s to 30s and, now in my mid 40s and how I did something in my 20s to how I do it now is very different. I'd love to hear about how like your coaching style has changed or what was different. But I know that for me, like, especially dealing with, I will say men in their 20s and 30s. And like, when there's always kind of a bit of, I think sometimes more of a tendency for questioning, right? And saying, oh, well, like you said, they want to say, I think, and I want them to know, no, you need to learn the system. So I'm totally going to make sure I'm right.
Generally for me, it's also men in their 20s and 30s. So
I've heard.
But it is, I think that's part of the process. I think in what we need to be in our situation, yours or mine, is we need to be a better teacher of teachers or a better coach of coaches, because that's really the job. Because ultimately now it's, can I teach you to teach them? I had this conversation the other day with Anthony Renner when we sometimes coaches will argue about, I said, let's do it this way. And they're like, well, I can do that. I like to do this. And I'm like, I understand. you're really good. I said, what I want you to think about in your mind is, would you want an intern doing what you just said? And they're like, well, no, I don't think I'd want the intern. I'm like, then that's not how we should do it. Because it doesn't matter if you feel like you can teach it, because sometimes that would be the argument of like, I'm a really good coach, I can do this. And I would explain to them, that's not what we're talking about. I'm not questioning your value as a coach. I'm questioning our ability to implement a system.
Yes.
And the system is, so you think about, they always say team, your offense is as good as your dumbest guy. That's kind of an old football thing in terms of the least or the most complicated your offense can be is the intellectual level of the dumbest person you put on the field. So, because you have to realize one guy not doing what he's supposed to do screws everything up. So it doesn't matter. You might think, oh, I've got a super cerebral left tackle and he really understands what we're supposed to do. It's like, great. But if your right tackle is some guy who's dumb as a stump, then it doesn't matter that the left guy is really smart, because he can't be doing the right guy's job and his job. And so I think we need to look at all of those kind of sports analogous situations and realize that it's very much the same thing, and I don't think there's a difference, whether it's your Kung Fu world or my strength and conditioning world, that ability to develop a replicatable system.
Yeah.
Right. So that when somebody comes to class, they get taught something in the way that you wanted them to learn that, or in the way that you think they will best learn that. And that's what we do all of the time. That is our constant kind of drive and strive situation, is we're driving and striving towards having a really, really good system that allows us to mass produce the skills that we want. Same thing you're doing.
Absolutely. And it is a matter of fact, that is exactly why you can and will and have the choice of when you want to retire, because you have put a really good system in place, knowing that things can be replicated and go on in the way in which you have taught everyone, right? And so that's the point. Like, because there was a time I was exactly what you're saying. I'm like, well, I'm gonna do it, and then I do everything, and then I have a nervous breakdown, or like my whole body just collapses and gets sick because I'm doing everything and I haven't taught anyone to do what I'm doing, and there's no system.
That's why when you look at what I'm doing, my job now, I know what my job is.
Yeah.
And my job is to coach coaches so that they can coach athletes. Me being really good at coaching athletes does not make Mike Boyle strength and conditioning more effective. Me being a very good coach of coaches and empowering that next level of coaches to then work with the level of coaches below them, that's what really is going to make us good. And so that's where the majority of my energy goes. And I always tell people that came out of the book, The One Thing. One Thing. Have you read One Thing? Yeah.
I believe so.
The end of The One Thing is they tell you that you need to decide on the one thing which by doing it will make all other things easier. And as I sat with this small book, Brandon Marcello gave me the book. I read it. I found it very frustrating because as a multitasker, the idea of one thing was not great for me. But I was able to eventually sit down and say, okay, the whole point of this is to find that one thing. And relatively quickly, there's the epiphany. Okay, my one thing is coaching coaches, staff training. So I put the most energy that I have goes into staff training. When I go into the gym, I watch how everybody's doing everything. And I don't run around and try to coach that individual coach necessarily and say, oh, do this better, do that better. I'll draw general trends. Okay, these are things we need to talk about in the staff meeting that we need to do better as a group. And then I try to find a way, and I say it all the time in staff meetings, I try to find a way to make them understand that I think they're doing a great job, but I think we can do a better job. And I think that's a really difficult concept too, when you're looking at people and saying, if you're constantly telling them, here's what we can do better, people will tend to get the feeling that they're not doing things well. And I try to get our staff all the time to understand, hey, we're doing an unbelievable job. You guys are amazing, but we are not better. Perfect. Yeah, we are not flawless. And these are the things, these are the areas that we can do better.
Yeah. And I know we have to wrap soon, but do you, do you get the same joy? Because I know that you really do still enjoy coaching athletes and seeing that, that transition, and coaching coaches to coach is a very different thing. Um, do you get the same joy out of doing what you're doing now as
I think I
then, or
get
is it because of where you are in your
I think
life
I
and
get
time?
more when I go, like, so I'll give you a perfect example. Our winter seminar this year, I sat and I watched Kevin, Steve Bigelow, Vinny, and Dan McGinley all do talks. And I mean, I had the best, they were so good. I had the best feeling in the world. I thought these guys just freaking killed it. They all knocked it out of the park. It was so good. And that to me is sort of the culmination of the whole thing. When I look and think, okay, I spoke for an hour. These guys came, people, a couple hundred people came, and they heard 4 really good presentations from 4 staff members at Mike Boyle Strength and Conditioning, all of which I thought were excellent. And all of them were incredibly well delivered. Sorry, I'm moving my computer around a little bit. But so I think I get as much of a jolt out of that as I do watching my girls in the Olympics. So, I watched the ice hockey in the Women's Olympics, and I saw them playing, and I
Yeah.
love that too.
Yeah.
But I think there is that close to home piece of seeing your staff really moving in a really positive direction. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. In my kung fu world, you'd be the Sigong, which is like the grand teacher. And so essentially a lot of these athletes that your coaches coach are your grand students. So it's kind of like having the grandkids. And they always say, you really, you treat the grandkids and the kids very differently.
Yeah, you're right. And that is very much the way that it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's like a different type of affection, right? And I think that does change over time. Well, I definitely don't want to go over time too much with you, because I want you to definitely come back and talk to me again. And in less than 3 years for sure.
Yeah. Less
Because
than 3 years, I
this
promise.
is certainly so long, but it is always a pleasure and a joy, but also thank you, because I always learn so much whenever I speak to you. So it was great to see you. And I'll link all the MBSC stuff for everyone, and you can follow Mike Boyle on his Twitter and his Instagram. But if you want to interact, apparently Twitter is the way to go with him.
Yes. Perfect.
Thank you so much.
You are welcome. Thank you.
That's all for today's episode. Thanks for listening to the Sifu Mimi Chan Show. Please subscribe and rate my podcast on your platform of choice and leave a review. You can become a patron of the show at patreon.com/SifuMimiChan to help keep this podcast going. Follow me and interact on social media at Sifu Mimi Chan on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.